Brian, screenfiles.com in review. What I'm looking at today is Dune, directed by Denis Villenueve. And I didn't see this movie in theaters, despite wanting to, because, as I've mentioned before, I think Warner Brothers' strategy of releasing their entire 2021 slate simultaneously in theaters and on HBO Max was bullshit, and I didn't want to contribute to that. And I saw no movie in theaters removed, and I stuck to my word. I saw no movies in theaters released by Warner Brothers in 2021. And Dune, a movie that I didn't think, to be totally honest, Denis Villeneuve was a great choice for, because his shooting style is very naturalistic, very flowing, very beautiful in fact, which tends to be the opposite you see from science fiction films. So I didn't think he was a great choice. And in that I was wrong, because Dune is a beautiful movie and much better than the 1984 movie, with caveats. First off, the 1984 movie is essentially the same as the 2021 movie, which is to say certain points are expanded upon and fleshed out in the newer version, but on the whole, it is not different. Now that could be just because it's adapted from the same source, but screenplay-wise, that has 3 writers listed. And so I would have thought that it would at least have been different, but it's not. It's essentially the same movie, just reinterpreted through another director. And I'm okay with that. And as I said, it's significantly better than a 1984 movie. But this movie lasts almost 3 hours. And if I were the director, I would have ended this at like 1 hour and 50 minutes because it didn't need to go any longer. There's a certain self-indulgence about this movie, which is really irritating. I wish that it would just end it when it should have ended. And by my reckoning, the ending of this movie should have been when Paul and his mother escaped the city and were camped out in the desert. That was a perfect ending for this movie, but it just kept going. It's like, oh my God, just end already. That's not to say I didn't like it. That's just to say that it was too long. It did not need to be as long as it was, and as a result, it felt very self-indulgent to me. And another thing is that I think the 1984 movie was too much on the minds of the filmmakers or the screenwriters, because they made a thing of pronouncing certain words differently than in the 1984 version, such as Padishah and Harkonnen. They pronounce, I think, Padishah and Harkonnen. And those are relatively small differentiators, but nonetheless, it showed the effort being made to make this movie different. And that extended to Baron Vladimir Harkonnen in particular. And I first heard this on Chapo Trap House when they reviewed Dune, and I couldn't verify it one way or the other. Though they worked really hard to make Stellan Skarsgård's portrayal of Vladimir Harkonnen the polar opposite of the portrayal in the 1984 movie. While one was boisterous and way over the top, the other one was understated to the point of sleepwalking. He was so polar opposite the portrayal in the 1984 movie. And that's a pity, because I wish that Villeneuve had went into this with the aim of making the best Dune movie possible, not necessarily making a movie that differed from the 1984 movie, because the difference is built in. Never mind the time from one version to the other. Denis Villeneuve is not David Lynch. It would differ regardless. The fact that he tried to, at least it seems to me, make it noticeably different in particular areas struck me as a bit weak. and not something I was particularly happy to see. And keep in mind, I'm not saying I didn't like this movie. I thought it was very good. I thought it was overlong, but very good. And there's a blandness to it, which kind of surprised me. If you look at David Lynch's movie, it has moments of repulsiveness, but at least it gets you to feel something in that repulsiveness. In fact, I would argue that Lynch's movie would have been much better received if it had balanced out that repulsiveness with scenes of beauty and wonder. It didn't. It just piled on the repulsiveness. And that was kind of, never mind icky, but just a really bad way to go about things. Villenueve takes the opposite tact, which is to say, there is a uniformity to things. There is, I don't want to say boringness, because that's not quite fair, but there is a consistency that is just not very interesting to watch. Say what you will about Lynch's movie, that movie is fascinating. It's not as good as this version, let's be clear. But nonetheless, it is very interesting. And some of the things that Lynch does are just fascinating, whether good or bad. It's fascinating. This version is safe in a lot of ways. And I really wish it took a few chances. On Chapel Trap House, when they were talking about this particular movie, they said that, I believe it was Matt compared it to Marvel movies. And in a sense that it's deliberately designed to have a sequel. And I thought that point was silly, and I still think it is, because Dune is a lot of book. And there's no way I think you could translate it well into one movie. That Villenueve were to have this be the first of, I assume, 2 parts is fine with me. It makes perfect sense. Only a fool, I think, would have done otherwise. But at the same time, if you look beyond the sumptuous sets, the great actors, and the excellent production design, this movie is bland. It's nothing you haven't seen before, and as much as David Lynch's version is criticized and hated by the director himself, from what I've heard, so much so that he won't even review it, his movie is a lot more interesting. So what do you think? This is Brian with ScreenFiles.com and Review. Do you agree, disagree? Let me know down below. And as usual, consider a like or a follow. Peace.